Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be making block 3 in Supernova, our block of the month for this year. If you have not started Supernova yet, you've got 2 options, well 3 technically. You can get the book from us. We've got a full book that shows you everything you need to know. And it's got full color instructions for everything for both the light or the cool and the hot colorways. So you can get that from us on our website. There are kits available, and quilt shops across the country are starting to host this as well. So the first thing you should do is go to your local quilt shop and ask them if they are doing Supernova. I know that there are several who have signed on to do it already. So we want you to support your local quilt shops, and if they're doing it, then sign on. If you can't get it through them, then we've got the books available for you if you want to use your stash. And then we also have quilt kits available in both the light and the hot colorways. All right, so we have already gone in depth into how to do your half square triangles, and we have one more month of half square triangles so that we really have them down. It's a great foundation before we start doing other types of triangle units next month. So I'm just going to go over real quick because we have really gone in depth on this, and I should be experts by now, but we're going to give you a refresher. And if you need more than this, then by all means, please go back and watch block 1 video tutorial or block 2, and you can get a few more in-depth looks at this, but we're going to keep this video kind of short because we've done all this for the last 2 months already. All right, so I've got my 2 pieces. Today we're working with the hot colorway, and I like to use my Sew Line pencil for that. It's got a nice chalk tool. It's refillable, so it's great. It shows up really good on this black fabric. If you're using the other one, these friction gel pens work really great as well. They're a little bit less expensive, but they definitely will not show up on your dark fabric. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line from point to point along both sides of this. And you really want to take the time to make sure that your ruler is really in line with those points, because whenever I teach this in person, if people's lines are off a little bit, say it's coming over here, they don't compensate to get straight to the point. They end up following the line, and then one triangle ends up being smaller, and then it's hard to get it to the right size at the end. So take your time when you are going through this and making your lines. Turn on a show on Netflix and then just do all that and get prepped for sewing. So you're going to put these right sides together, and if you want, you can put a pin across the top and across the bottom where the points are. That'll help keep everything in line as you're sewing. This is kind of small, and I've done probably thousands of these, maybe hundreds of thousands. So I'm not going to pin, but feel free to do that if it makes you feel more comfortable. So I'm lining up the edge of the presser foot with that line that we drew, and I'm treating that as my edge. So I'm just going to get going down the side of that. And when I get towards the tip here where I can't really hold on very well to that and guide it, what I do is I just move my finger to the right of the piece, and then I just kind of aim for that corner to make sure that the edge of my presser foot comes out right at the corner of the piece. Now, if you're doing a bunch of these, and you are for this quilt, what you're going to do is just lift up your presser foot, slide another one underneath, and chain piece all the way down the left side of them. When you are done, you can go ahead and lift that needle up in your presser foot, turn it around, and now you're going to line everything up again with that edge of your presser foot, even with the line that we drew, just like it was the edge of your fabric. And now we're going to sew down the other side of that line that we drew. The reason why this is my preferred method of making half square triangles is you're sewing on a bias whenever you make a triangle, and that's the stretchy part of the fabric. So if you cut this into a triangle first, you're way more likely to stretch out that seam by accident. And by having it as a square first, when you're sewing it down both sides of that line, you are able to have the fabric be a little bit more stable, so you're less likely to get everything out of whack when you're sewing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this and press it open, then we're going to square it up. So now it's time to give this a trim, and I know it's really tempting to skip this step, but what it does is it gets your square to the exact size that it's supposed to be, which makes it so much easier to get everything to go exactly where it's supposed to do, your points to end up where they're supposed to be, and your block to lie really flat when you're done. So don't skip this step, it's so critical. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I am lining up the 45-degree line on my ruler with that seam allowance there. And I want it to be right on there because that's going to make sure that my points are going right to the corner of my square. Then I'm making sure that I've got some fabric hanging past the measurement that I need to cut to on the left and the bottom side under the ruler. And then also some hanging on the right and the top. I'm right-handed, so that's the side that I'm going to cut down first. Once I'm happy, I'm just going to go ahead and trim off those sides. Now I'm going to give everything a 180-degree flip, so the sides I just cut are now on the left and the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and line everything up again. Now I'm lining up exactly with the measurement I need to trim to on the left and bottom sides. And I've got my 4.5 inch, or I've got nothing is 4.5 inches in here if you're trying to figure it out from the video. And if you do, buy the pattern. Help us eat. Anyway, so my 45-degree line is going down the seam allowance as normal. And I'm just going to go ahead and trim. And so now I've got points going straight to the edges, and I've got my perfect half square triangle. And you see, I haven't trimmed off all that much, but it really makes a huge difference in the finished quilt. So if I just put the one I haven't trimmed next to it, you can see it's not that much smaller, but it's going to make a huge, huge difference when it comes to the accuracy and the flatness of your final quilt. All right, so I've got one row here laid out and ready to sew. And again, if you need more in-depth on doing this, we go really in-depth in it in the first couple of videos for this block, but it's the same skill set, so we're not going to take a ton of time with it today. The one thing I will note is for these ones here, you don't have any seams to match, so you can just go ahead and flip these right sides together and sew from top to bottom, and you'll be fine. In the center bits where you do have things that need to go together and points that need to match like that, what you're going to do is you're going to flip it right sides together, and then what I normally do is I look at it from above and I make sure that my seams are aligned, and it's really easy on this one because it's a clear black on one side and green on the other. And then if you're not sure that you've got it right, you can always peel it back and make sure that your seams are right on top of each other. And then I just put a little pin in right in this right side of the seam allowance and leave that in until I've sewn all the way down. But again, if you need a more in-depth look at that, go ahead and re-watch the videos for blocks 1 and 2. All right, so I'm going to move my sewing machine needle back to that regular 1/4 inch seam setting. We're done with that scant 1/4 inch seam. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew these guys right into sets of 2 and then lay them back out to make sure I have everything still going in the correct direction. I always recommend that so you don't get triangles pointing the wrong way. It's really easy to do. Whenever I'm assembling quilts like this, I usually just do one row at a time. And you're making several of the blocks, so you can chain piece this and get a lot accomplished. But I find I'm much less likely to get something sewn in the wrong place if I just limit it to one row at a time, and that's what works best for me. All right, so get these guys right sides together and chain piece away. All right, so I've got everything laid back out. It's looking good. It's looking the way it does in the diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and complete sewing this row together. For me, I find it's more efficient to wait to press until I have the entire row together. Then I can just hit all those seams at once. All right, so if you've done this right, your points are going to end about 1/4 inch away from the edge of your fabric. And that means that when you pin this together and you sew it, that is going to be right next to each other when you join it. So I'm going to give you my tips and tricks on how I pin these so I don't ever lose any of those points. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and flip this right sides together. And I'm going to put it right at the tip of where all those seams come together, right above where that point is, because I want to be able to pin through that part on the other side too. So now I'm going to put it in the same location up here, just right above where that goes. And I'm pinning right in the middle of that open seam. Now I'm going to take my thumb and my forefinger, I'm going to pinch that so that that pin is going straight up and down through the fabric. Now taking a second pin, while holding that first one in place, I'm going to go ahead and pin horizontally across the fabric in that seam allowance. So what I've done here is I pin this in place so that way those 2 points are going to be right on top of each other and you're much more likely to have your joins end up where they should be. So you're going to repeat that for any 2 points that need to go together. And for the rest of them, it's a little easier. You can just kind of line them up on top And especially for these black ones, you're really not going to tell if you're off just by a little bit, but do try to make it as close as you can, and just by lining up so those seams are right on top of each other. So now when I sew this, I'm going to sew just to the right side of where all those points come together, and that will ensure that I have a really great join. Slow down a little bit. And only once I have my sewing needle down in the first half of that seam allowance do I pull it from the pin, because that kind of acts like a pin and holds everything together after we took all the time to pin that properly. All right, so it's the moment of truth time where we see how we did. And when I open it up, that is pretty good. Those points are really coming together nicely. It's gonna look great once I press that open. Let's check the other one. Also really good. So if you weren't happy with the way any of these go, no need to rip everything out. Just rip about 1 inch or so on either side of your point, repin it, and then just re-sew that one little bit. So no need to rip the whole thing out if you're not happy with just one little one. All right, so I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to press this open again. We do it a little bit differently just to make sure that we don't flip any of these seams going in the wrong way. So what I do is I get started, and then instead of just sliding the iron all the way down like I normally do, is I keep my fingers where I open up that seam and I kind of press it open a little bit there, and then I lift it and then move it down. So while that's heating up, I kind of am pressing the next one open so I can just set that down. And what this does is it allows me to get a nice good open press without pushing any of these going in the opposite direction. So when you go to quilt it, you have a lot of options because you don't have to worry about avoiding those points because you're going to break a needle because it's too much thickness there. This really gives you so many options. I quilt right into points all the time, and it looks, I just love the look of it, but it's because I pressed it this way. All right, pretty happy with that. I like those joints. All right, so I'm gonna finish my block up and then we'll come back and show you what it looks like. I'm gonna zoom in to show you guys something. So I had one of the gals in my shop put together a good chunk of this block for me. I've already done the quilt, so I've had the experience, but I had her do it to help me get ready for this video tutorial. She's been sewing for about a year and she's doing a great job, a phenomenal job, but sometimes when you're doing this, you've got to have some wiggle room because it didn't turn out exactly the way you meant it to be. So when we look at this one, that is not a full 1/4 inch seam. It is 1/8 of an inch seam, so you're going to be okay. You're not going to have your seam pop open. But what I'm going to do is I'm still going to put my needle in, or my pin in, just like we did before. And then I'm still going to go with this top part here. And I'm just putting the pin in right at the tip of where that triangle is, even though it's not a full 1/4 inch seam. So when I look at this from the back, I've got extra fabric hanging off here. So when I sew this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna treat this as my 1/4 inch seam. I'm still gonna sew just the seam side of where that point is. And it's gonna be a little skinnier on one side, and that's okay. It's not so skinny that it's going to damage the integrity of the quilt, but I would much rather have a skinny seam that nobody's gonna know about on the inside of my quilt than miss a point where everybody can see it. So if you have to fudge it a little too, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. That's what this method is really great for, because you can really just direct where your points are going to be, whether or not you did it perfectly to start with. So this is it. This is our block 3, and this is what it looks like in the hot version. So we're going to be switching up colors next month. So this kind of forms, the ones we made so far form that center star, and then we're going to have lots of little twinkling lights going around it in a different color starting next month. So it's really exciting. It's fun. We're also going to introduce some new different types of triangles to make from squares next month. So we're going to try some new tips and tricks and really work on getting those points as perfect as you can. And this is really a great skill building quilt. I hope that you guys are enjoying it. And again, if you want to join in on Supernova, first ask your local quilt shop if they are going to be participating and if they are ordering it to follow along with it at their shop, because that's going on. There are people, we've sent out the sample quilts to a couple shops already, so you're going to be able to see it potentially where you are at. So make sure you ask your local quilt shop owner, see if they're bringing it in. If they're not, then you can always get everything from us. We've got the book available for purchase separately, and that's called Supernova. You can get it at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. It has all the measurements and the cutting instructions, step-by-step diagrams with the actual fabrics we're using in the quilt, so you can use your own stash if you want, or you can always get kits from us as well. So thanks so much for following along, and until next time, happy quilting.